This week, I am very pleased to get a chance to talk to an amazing artist. His name is Tarik Barri. He is an extraordinary visualist. He is a composer. He's a media artist in all ways imaginable, and he's taken some time out of his busy schedule to talk to us for the podcast. So, with that, I'm going to say hello to Tarik. Hello, how's it going?
Hi, I'm doing very well, thank you. Happy to be here in your podcast.
Thank you so much. Well, why don't we kick this off by having you talk just a bit about what your current work looks like? What kind of stuff are you doing right now?
My current work involves an audiovisual project. That's a solo project that I'm working on right now. And also there's two visual projects where I'm providing the visuals next to another musician who's doing the music. So basically everything I'm doing is somehow audiovisual, but in some projects I'm taking just the visual, side of it, and in the solo projects I'm doing both sides of it.
Sure, sure. Now, one of the things I noticed from just a quick perusal of your website, and I'll make sure that I have a link in the show notes for this,
Mm-hmm.
for your site. But one of the things I noticed is that you have a pretty active work both in live performance type environments as well as installation work, right?
Yeah,
How much
yeah.
of how much what is your balance of that? Do you tend to do more of one or the other, or is it kind of an equal thing?
Actually, all of my work stems from the same source, and with that, I don't just mean my brain. I also mean that it's also all coming from the same program in a way. No, not in a way. It's literally the same program. I can put. I've got this software that I programmed, which I named Versum. And in Versum, I can put it into an installation mode, or into a live performance mode, or into a pure visuals mode. Much work that I put into making an installation is also simultaneously function as work that can be used during a next visual performance or during a next audio visual performance. So the balance is even then hard to describe. Yeah, it's all the same thing, but with slightly different emphasis.
Sure. That's actually interesting that you would have the same software be able to do both because it seems like they are two such completely different worlds, especially since I mean with your installation stuff, do you do anything that's like reactive, like either audio reactive or, sensor based or anything like that?
I have not yet used sensor-based things, but actually that's what I want to do for the next installation that I'll be creating, because I want people to have a really nice, intuitive sensor-based way with which they can move through the virtual 3D environments that I create.
Right, right. And so that's interesting because one of the things I feel like when I watch your performance work, it seems
Mhm.
to be like audio reactive, except you've made a point of saying that it's not, you don't actually have a pipeline of audio into your program. Instead, you are kind of the sensor. You're like the
Yeah.
personal sensor, and then you adjust the controls or you make changes to the visuals in order to have your personal reaction to the music, right?
Yeah, that's completely right indeed. I started out doing my first performances with Robert Henke. The exact year I don't even know. I think it's 2009 that I did my first gig with him. When I started doing this with Robert Henke, we just coupled everything together. And there's a tendency to think that things are perhaps beautiful because they show off all these possibilities that you have within the programming world, and it's kind of fascinating. And you can make a beautiful machine that functions in a way that can make specifically a program or somebody who's fascinated by computers very happy. But that's something different from the beauty that one can see by just blankly, experiencing the whole audio visual combination. Basically, what I noticed was that it became boring when I was doing a couple of these gigs with Robert Henke. every bass drum was having a similar reaction,
Hmm.
and I was trying to make these reactions as nice as possible, but there was something impersonal in how the visuals were reacting to the music. And what I really like about in music very much, and also within visuals in art, is that things have their specific reason for being there. That a thing is not just there because this loop got triggered some time ago, so that's why we're hearing this beat in exactly the same way again. I like it when everything feels alive, just like every moment in time is a unique moment. I also want every moment within musical time to be unique. Obviously there's many also how do you call it, there's many exceptions to that rule. Like sometimes it's precisely a cool thing about music that it has a very machine-like repetitive structure.
Right.
But I'm now just describing in general what I when I create stuff, I like to go the other direction, where things become very highly unique for that specific moment. And that's also just something that I discovered through time in seeing, okay, I find this quite boring what's happening right now. So slowly I toned down the whole automatic MIDI triggering and audio analysis to the point where I basically decided, okay, I'm not going to use this at all anymore. I actually just want to stop using this crutch to lean on and just go into the more scary domain of, myself being real time, very active, responding to everything at a point, and even rhythmical stuff, etc. I need to be very on it to make it somehow connect with the music.
Sure, that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. What the way you talk about it reminds me of like how you would approach poetry as an artwork, right? Probably the
Mhm.
worst way to consider poetry is to look at each word and think about the meaning of each word. And
Yeah.
and maybe
Yeah.
still a poor way of experiencing poetry is like saying, "Ooh, how do the rhymes line up?" And do the
Yeah.
rhymes trigger, rhythms for me? Where really the
Yeah.
best way to experience poetry is to kind of float over the top of it and absorb the meaning, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's actually a very, very nice analogy you make there indeed. The Of course, also within the poetry, in the end, of course, the rhythm stays important, and
Hmm.
all these specific words do remain important. But I guess that even within the creation, you might find even the best words by not being completely zooming into the small detail of that specific word. At some point, the words will flow into place, and they become better as a whole, and also even each individual one gets a deeper meaning.
Right.
I think that's definitely what's happening within my visuals also. As I let go of these more simple direct connections, I still see loads of connections, but they seem to have so many more layers and so many more different multi-interpretable connections also with the music.
Right.
And then, of course, also what also still remains is that it is cool to still have that option of having things being completely audio reactive or MIDI reactive, but to use that as a tool that you can consciously apply when you feel that it's needed. So not to use it as a crutch that you can that you then become dependent on, but just to have it as another tool in your toolkit and apply
Right.
it wisely. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, one of the things is over the course of that discussion, you really kind of focused on the concept of beauty. And I tend to think of beauty, there's sort of things that as a culture we can kind of embrace as beautiful, but there's also a sense to which beauty is kind of an individual expression. And
Sure. Yeah.
and it often comes from, an individual's background. One of the things I like doing in my podcast is kind of finding out a little bit about people's paths, how they got to be artists, and how that's informed the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
How did you get to where you are? What is your starting story, and how did you find yourself becoming a audio visual artist? I mean, very few people when they're 4 years old, When mom and dad say, "Hey, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Say, "I want to be an audiovisual artist," right?
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I'm curious, what is
Especially in 1984, I think that was specifically rare. Yeah.
right? Yeah, there was no such thing. So I'm curious, what was your track? What is your approach to the art?
Yeah. Well, to some degree, I guess I could say that it's also. Yeah, I was going to say that it's a mystery, but no, it's not that much of a mystery how I got to where I am. It's just unexpected.
Hmm.
I am now finding myself where I am, and I'm honestly surprised. Of course, one can be surprised 24/7. So I'm also accustomed to the life and the job that I have, but still,
Right.
it's. I would not have expected myself to end up here, and also until quite late within my whole development, I still never suspected myself, to ever become an artist, even in any way. But yeah, I'll just start chronologically and start, sketching the bricks that were stacked one on top of each other that at some point made this whole thing happen. When I was a child, when I was 5 years old, we went to Saudi Arabia. That was in 1985, I believe. With our family, we went to Saudi Arabia, where I had some advantages and some disadvantages. The disadvantage of living in Saudi Arabia was that I did not have many friends there because we were in a sort of close community for foreigners, which was actually literally shielded off with a wall so that the bad guys couldn't come in, and the walls had a gate in them, and the gate was guarded by people with big guns
Right.
to keep all the foreigners in Saudi Arabia safe. And within those walls, there weren't many kids that I could really interact with nicely. Fortunately, I had a brother, so that I didn't become totally socially awkward, even though I did become a little bit during that time. So there was that boredom, a little bit of social how do you call it, exclusion. There was a very strong heat during the daytime, which made it very difficult to even go and play outside during the daytime. Only towards the evening that had become an option. And my mother was home teaching us. So, yeah, or how do you call it? Homeschooling.
Yeah, homeschooling, right.
My mother homeschooled us, and that meant that my brother and I could learn the things at our tempo. We could take more time where we needed, but it could also take less time where we didn't need so much time, which meant that after half a year every year, our material for that year was, we went through it. So there was half year of school and a half year of free time. So there was half year of free time, not many friends. The afternoons you basically had to stay inside, and on top of that we had a computer. So yeah, that's where I started really getting into that computer and seeing at some point by coincidences that if you give the computer certain commands, they play little notes or they give a little line of text back. My mother saw my interest in these things, and then during a holiday in the Netherlands, she bought a computer book where I could just type over some code and stuff would happen. And from there on, I got into the whole programming thing. I was definitely not in any way like a kid genius, and I didn't do anything spectacular there. But it just really introduced my mind to the way that a computer thinks, basically. The very strict logic, how quickly also it can run through a whole bunch of lines of code to make a little very simple pixelated puppets do a karate kick, those things. That just made my mind a little bit more fertile. When we then came back to the Netherlands when I was 10 years old, there was no that I didn't program anymore. I also then wasn't really thinking of that so much as a thing, that was inherent to me or anything. So programming was out of the picture. In high school, I had a strong interest in both drawing and in music. And unfortunately, the rules were that I couldn't choose both in my curriculum because that would be too much of a pretpakket, as Dutch people would call it, too much of a fun-based thing. Because obviously both music and drawing aren't serious things
Right.
that
It's not
you know.
painful enough, right? There's not enough
Exactly,
pain.
that's it. That's it indeed. Yeah, yeah. I guess a vegetable also isn't really a vegetable if it tastes good.
Right.
Uh, yeah. So I chose drawing. I chose drawing and art history, and then after that I did architecture for half a year. Didn't really like that. Then I did psychology for 2.5 years. Kind of liked that, but I noticed in the meantime that I was also getting too addicted to making music on the computer with also tracker-based programs. So then I decided, you know what, I actually need to try and really give this a go, especially because I got one specific boost of confidence by John Peel at one point playing one of my tracks on BBC Radio. And yeah, that was like kind of a big shock for me. All of a sudden, I realized, hey, maybe this is something that I can actually do. Before this time, I'd never really taken the thought of an artistic career in any way, either musically or in painting or anything. I'd never taken that really seriously, just because I thought that I was not the kind of person that one needs to be a true artist. I think I had a very romantic idea of what an artist is, and I believe that an artist would be somebody who truly suffers the moment that they stop creating. Somebody who lives and sleeps for their art, who is full of passion for what they do. And I was just a guy who liked making nice stuff and didn't have this strong feeling that I thought that a true artist would need. So it was only after I got this vote of confidence, basically from John Peel, that I realized this doesn't just happen to anyone. Perhaps there is something there that I just didn't even recognize myself, because perhaps my view of an artist was a little bit too skewed. Maybe an artist can just be, a person just like myself.
Sure.
So yeah, so then I applied to the School of Music and Technology in Hilversum in the Netherlands. Got accepted, and that was the first study that I finally managed to bring to a successful end. And during that study, I managed to figure out that this whole, choice between music and visual art that I was forced to make in the high school, that wasn't really a choice that I needed to make anymore, because I learned about Max MSP during the study, and I learned about jitter within Max MSP. So basically what I learned at this school was that with the same programming language that they were teaching me to create music with, I could also use that same programming language to create visuals with. And the point that I really started seeing how easy that was and how accessible this world has become for me, also with some thanks to my previous programming knowledge that I had learned as a child, I all of a sudden saw that there's this huge world that opened up for me. And that huge world at the beginning was just represented with a little sine notes doing woo, woo, and a little simple cube rotating around its axis at different speeds with the changing frequency of that sine wave. But that was it. But I did realize where this could go. Like, computers were only going to get faster. If I was going to put my attention into this, and then I would only get better in manipulating this. And I had images of the video clip of Gans Graf, which was a video clip that Alexander Rutherford made for Autechre, which had a three-dimensional object that was morphing all kinds of really exciting, weird ways to Autechre's music. I had little, flashes of that in my mind, and I saw this can be made in real time. Perhaps, I can at least explore which doors will get opened if I try and move in that general direction.
Right.
From that moment on, I was experimenting a lot with audio-visual connections and getting very interested also in what happened within my brain as I was combining the creation of music with the creation of visuals, especially if I have both of them in real time. If I real time just jam and start editing within Ableton Live, for instance, and at the same time in real time I see some visual also moving along, then at some point automatically I find myself adapting the music to what I'm seeing. And that's not And then I'm not speaking of making a compromise. I'm speaking of
Getting some inspiration.
yes, it gives an inspiration, and I guess that also a nice analogy would be to say when a guitar player and a drummer work together, it's not like that the drummer compromises their playing by actually paying attention to the guitar player or the other way
Right,
around.
right, right.
Uh, that's the same thing. Both are just different, let's say, channels of sound, which are also being perceived within the brain as different channels of sound. One can say, of course, they all enter through the ear, but in the end, what matters is what happens in the brain. The brain hears the drums, and the brain hears the guitar. They are perceived as different entities, but combined, they make a combined, emotions and combined experience. And the same can also be said for what comes in through the eyes and what comes in through the ears. Yes, these are two physically different entrances, but still the end result, it still all ends up in that same big, mysterious, weird, pool of our consciousness
Right.
where it becomes this combined experience again. That also makes me believe that visuals are just as much music as music can be. Well, visuals are not by definition just as much music as music can be, but they can be approached in such a way that they do become part of the music. And that's basically what my whole work has been about since then. In just different variations of that general principle.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Now, a couple of questions, because boy, I mean, just the that story just has a lot of really interesting twists and turns.
Mm.
First of all, the track that John Peel played, it was clear that that was a real seminal moment for you. That was a point
Yeah.
at which, like, you came to a crossroads in life and decided, well, I can go this way that I would love to go.
Yeah.
How did John Peel ever trip across your track?
Yeah, John Peel tripped across my track because some longer time ago I was playing guitar in a really weird band called Tom Revolver in the Netherlands, and
Okay.
we did a gig at, I even forgot where we had that gig. It might have been in Breda, who knows. At the same gig, there was another band called the Nazis from Mars. These people, the Nazis from Mars, had apparently published some tracks on this label called Irritant Records, and I stayed in contact with them. They heard some of the music that I was working on because they were interested. And then they said, "Oh, wait, you should actually really send this to our label, Irritant Records."
Hmm.
This guy Andy, I forgot his last name, Andy something from Ayrton Records. He really liked one track that I gave him, so he put that on a how do you call this, a compilation album. This compilation album then just made the rounds. Earth Records was
Right.
slightly more known, was a slightly more known entity than I myself was, because I was completely unknown.
Right.
And then John Peel, somehow being interested in weird and interesting underground music, he stumbled across upon that album and chose specifically my track to play. And then this Andy from Ayrton Records wrote me in a very enthusiastic email, "John Peel just played your track on BBC Radio." Uh, yeah, and that kind of hit me. That's I first I just knew, okay, I'm happy. This is great. But then also shortly after, what does this mean? This has to mean something.
Right.
Is it just going to be this weird little blip on my life, or do I need to continue this further? And then I realized, yeah, basically it took me some time after that to realize that if I were not going to pursue this path, that I was making it very, very likely that I would become miserable and regretful
Right.
later in life. Well, not necessarily. I probably, would have found a way to, deal with stuff and perhaps become very happy in a different way. But at that point, I just had this huge fear that if I would not pursue this right now, I would just always have this question in my mind: what if I would have actually tried and pursue this? So at some point, it just became like the rational decision to just pursue this and rather fail and then know that I failed, rather that than not try.
Sure. Now, at the time, you were using tracking tools to do your music making, huh?
Mhm.
I have tried a couple of times to just play with a tracker, and it breaks
Mhm.
my brain. It is
Hmm.
such a data driven, it feels like you're dealing with data rather than dealing with music a lot of the time.
Yeah, yeah.
How what was it about the tracker that worked for you? What was the thing that made that the right tool for you to express yourself? Because even back then, you would have had access to a lot of different kinds of sequencers and samplers or whatever. What is it about the tracker that really was the thing that was the tool that worked for you?
That question has a very disappointing answer, I'm afraid. Which also an answer that would not fit this romanticized ideal of the artist who, always follows the path of his known destiny, and everything is meant to happen in a specific way, and he feels whatever. It's simply that just some guys in my high school were using that to make silly songs, and I thought that's cool. I'm gonna just join them and making some silly songs, and it was basically just availability that drew me to the Striker program. I was completely unaware of the other options. I was also
Mm,
unaware of myself having any type of serious, musical ambition or anything. So it was
sure.
just fooling around with the tracker. That's yeah, it was just fooling around by coincidence that just kept me there until at some later point in life I really discovered, oh, if I'm going to take this seriously, then I might as well also just see what's, for instance, this Ableton Live thing is all about.
Right, right.
Or Fruity Loops, actually. Fruity Loops, I definitely need to mention Fruity Loops because that's an awesome program also.
Yeah, Fruity Loops too it lives in a world almost halfway between a tracker and like more typical DAW software. It seems to still have a little of that tracker nature to it.
The tracker, well, maybe it does have. I didn't even recognize that as such because I came just purely from a world of trackers.
Uh-huh.
So if anything about Fruit Loops would be true a tracker like, I wouldn't even be noticing that. Just in the same way that a fish won't know what water is.
Right, sure, right.
Yeah.
I get it. So now, when you went to school, you kind of had this interesting path through school, but you ended up landing in this music and tech kind of environment. And I'm curious because it seems like the Netherlands, more than almost any other place, the Netherlands has a long history of interweaving technology and music, right? Going
Mhm.
back to the days of tape music and stuff like that, and they're integral part of in that. But just the variety of different university-based environments where you can experience the intersection of art and technology. It seems like the Netherlands has always been at the forefront and has a real rich history in that. What do you think it is about the Netherlands that does that? And do you feel like that was something that was on your radar, that the availability of that made it possible for you to take this approach?
Honestly, I wouldn't be able to pinpoint myself. What is it within the Netherlands that it's such a fertile ground for these arts to emerge? I actually don't know. I mean, sure, I mean, money is a big issue, and the fact that there's that well, especially back in those days, I, for instance, felt that I could go and do such a weird thing like music and technology, partially because I felt perhaps even falsely secure about my future. That I thought, well, I'm living in this kind of like really lucky, privileged country anyway. There's always going to be some way for me to earn my money, even if I completely fail in this domain.
Uh-huh.
So I guess that for me personally was just the reason why I thought that I could go in there. But there's also I guess the most internet usage per person on average. In the Netherlands, there's different ways in which the Netherlands are very technology based, and honestly, I can't really explain that. I can say though that it definitely, as I was, slowly being introduced to this whole world, also while studying music and technology, that I was very much picking the fruits of that. I was going
Mm-hmm.
to festivals like Today's Art and Sonic Act. I guess that somehow subconsciously I assumed that this was things which were happening very regularly all over the Western world. I didn't have a specific idea that I was in a country where I was specifically lucky to be living there. Yeah, but I definitely picked the fruits. I can very clearly remember going to Sonic Acts. I don't know which year. It might have been like 2007, 2006, and being blown away by the fact that such a huge stage was given to people making drone music and just
Right.
the incredible physical impact that it had on me. I was really tripping balls purely on the music. It was crazy, and I was that was very very inspiring.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, from thousands of miles away, the Sonic Axis is very influential just because of, the people that they brought to the forefront and the way that they sort of like presented the information. That in particular is an example of something where its impact is extraordinary and like historical. So that must have
Mhm.
been incredible to be, at the stage. That must be wild.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
For your personal practice, one of the things I'm always interested in talking to people, I'm interested when I talk to people who are comfortable talking about sort of like programming and software creation as well as having an artistic vision because that's yet another place where a balancing act has to occur. I'm
Yeah,
fascinated by how people deal with balance, right? And when you're doing both programming and artistic stuff, it's always interesting to me to talk to people who have to balance those two things because each of those tends to be a very consuming effort. If you're doing
mhm.
software work, you have a tendency to like go into the code hole and
Yeah,
and you focus on stuff and you're like deep into the algorithms or you're trying to carry this map around in your head of all the subroutines and all the
yeah,
places where you're calling things. And
yeah,
then when you get into the art thing, you tend to like really dive into, I'm trying to express this thing and it's not quite working out right. And I need to, what color space do I need to work in or what sonic space? And you tend to go down the art hole, right? And
mm-hmm.
I'm curious, how do you balance having to jump between two different holes? How
Yeah,
do you manage that balance?
yeah. I think you described all of that very accurately. I completely agree with with everything you just said. And the balancing is very difficult, and honestly, not even something that I would say that I'm good at. I mean, I do manage to get results every time, so I'm not completely failing at it. But I do often get myself in panic, basically, by not being as good in that as I would like to. Um, I tend to really go down the programming hole. I guess somehow the programming hole is a hole that's more easy to get lost in. Also, because it's less scary, it's less personal. There's less insecurity involved. The moment that you really just are applying logic, it's just a whole bunch of relatively simple steps. Often, sometimes it gets very complicated, but often it's just a whole bunch of simple steps that all can just be stacked on top of each other, and you're feeling that you're making progress. It's in that sense rewarding, and that can be a thing that you do until eternity. And then to make that switch to actually creatively using it, yeah, that is that is a very difficult one, which in my case is very much, I guess, forced upon me by deadlines, which I in turn also force upon myself. So in the end, it is my choice, but I always definitely need to have deadlines of performances or exhibitions, these kind of things, in order to get myself over that hurdle, over that insecurity. At some point, basically, I come to a point where I panic, when it's really just not cool anymore, when I realize that I will definitely disappoint everybody, including myself, if I'm not going to start working right now on the creative side. And then I get there, and then it's a lot of fun again. But there's always a lot of pain involved in making that switch from the programming side to the creative side.
Sure, but I think that the kind of work you do and the environments where you do your work, I would think that it's pretty hard to be insecure and still get the gig done, right? So if you're doing a gig with Thom Yorke, or if you're doing a gig with Monolake,
Yeah.
it's you're working with some very self-secure people, right? They may have insecurities, but they're not going to express it in any particular way. And it would have to be a little intimidating to have, to feel somewhat insecure and still have to show up and nail the gig, right?
Yeah, that is a thing though that just about every artist has, and probably many artists who really seem who really seem like they don't have any problems with self security, are just the ones who, out of an extreme insecurity, have built up an extremely carefully thought out mask. The people are paradoxes in these ways.
Sure.
Um, I think it's very true that artists are hotbeds of neuroses and insecurities, completely.
Right, right.
And so yeah, I definitely have. But yeah, you are right in this sense that when I go on stage with a Thom Yorke or a Monolake for the very very first time, that's an extremely nerve-wracking experience, and is yeah, I can specifically remember very clearly now the first time that I was on stage with Thom Yorke, that it felt as if I was approaching a black hole, uh, where all laws of physics and nature would break down. There's no way of knowing what would happen there. I could also not think of any future beyond that point. I
Right.
have no idea how this is ever supposed to happen. And obviously, also, then there's these other aspects of the imposter syndrome, thinking,
Sure.
wait, who am I again? Why? How come that did somebody made a weird mistake here? Yeah, but then I guess I do also have not like a super effective antidote against the insecurity, but there are some things which I do know. What I do know is that um, if I think that these people that I'm performing with are as cool as I think they are, then perhaps their choice for me may mean something, then even though I'm not sure about it, they also chose me, so we're in this together anyway, in some
Right.
sense.
Right.
um, and also, I am aware of the imposter syndrome being a very common thing, so I also know, even though it feels like I'm in the most unique, weird, and insecure position, we all get here at some point or the other. So I do try to sometimes realize that I guess I'm now thinking a little bit about what I said about this idea of the artist being this sort of like ideal creature. Um, Everybody, I think it's nice to realize that everybody deep down feels just as fumbling, mumbling, idiotic as you yourself do. This is a very common thing with everybody, and that's also why I think that the supremely self secure artist also doesn't really exist. The only thing that does happen with experience, with all these things, is that at some point I do realize that, okay, not all of my life now depends on this gig going right. Like even with
Right.
somebody like Thom Yorke, which still that's a weird experience, but I'm also getting kind of used to it.
Right.
That's at some point I know, okay, even if my computer crashes and burns, or I do the ugliest, weirdest mistake ever here, life will continue. Also, I have already proved some things in my life, so not everything's gonna hinge on this. And then still the nerves come up, and it's all very, very exciting. And you really pray to all the gods that everything will go fine. But it becomes a little bit more. You can relativize. Is that a word? You can basically just put a little more in perspective to the rest of your life.
Sure. Now, one of the things I'm curious about, you said that you sort of like base everything that you do off of this Versum software that you've developed. Is that
Yeah,
has this been something that you've been working on for a long time? So like is this were you using kind of early versions of this structure like when you first started working with Robert Hinka and
yeah,
Monolake? And so
yeah.
this is something you've been building up over the last almost decade, right?
Which is kind of crazy, but yes, that is true. Yeah, I started this same program that I'm still using. I started that I think halfway, let's say, I think beginning of 2008 approximately is when I started doing it. It was
Okay.
the project also with which I finished school, and it was a three-dimensional audiovisual sequencer.
Got
And
it.
actually, saying that I was working on an audio-visual sequencer is kind of like a tautology, if that's an English word.
Uh-huh. It is.
Basically, any sequencer, except maybe if there's one specifically designed for blind people, but normally any sequencer already is an audio-visual sequencer. You see Ableton Live and you hear it, and the
Right.
visuals are meant to inform what things are going to sound like. That's what I was also creating for myself, but then it was a 3D audio-visual sequencer where I could fly through music, and the melody that you would hear would depend on the path that I take within 3D space.
Sure, sure. That makes
Yeah.
sense. Now, we talked before about how, one of the things that you did was you started off doing very tightly attached to like audio reactive, and you eventually removed that, seeing that as a crutch, and then you have it as tooling that you can use, but you're not locked to
Mhm.
it, right? But
Mhm.
your software having been with you for 10 years, that's got to
Mhm.
be like, that has to have become almost like your instrument. And while not
Yeah.
a crutch, it probably
Mhm.
is one of those areas of solitude so that when you do end up in a stressful position, you're at least saying, well, at least I know this tool. I know this instrument really well.
Yeah, and there was also a time when I had only had experience performing with Robert Henke, aka Monolake, traveling through virtual 3D visual worlds, which were reacting to his music. When I had only had that experience, I also wasn't quite convinced of my own, worth or value as an artist. I just knew that I'd made this fancy program
Right.
that was able to impress people, but it was not quite clear whether this impressing people was because of the purely artistic merits or because of the fact that it is considered impressive to
Right.
make this whole world just by yourself. And
That it
of course,
worked.
people,
Yeah.
yeah, that had actually worked, and it was created by one person. I mean, it doesn't cost me much trouble to understand how that's impressive from a technical viewpoint. But then it was actually really interesting that when I started working with Thom Yorke, that he asked me. Well, I at one point introduced my system to him. He saw this 3D stuff, and shortly after, when I made the first video for him, he asked, "What if you just try and do everything in 2D?" Which for me sounded almost like, what if you try and do what you do without it being what you do? It just felt like, wait, what?
Right.
But obviously he saw something there, which I myself had failed to see. That obviously there's way more than just traveling through virtual 3D environments.
Right.
If you have a surface, basically a rectangle that the usual screen is, you can use this to just compose in colors, use the relative proportions within that surface in a way. I'd never done that before in such a conscious way. And as I was doing that more and more, and then also later on, I started applying other types of techniques which were more explicitly 2D. At some point recognized that I was making a whole different type of imagery than ever before, and still I kind of digged it. I still thought, hey, actually this is kind of beautiful, which is what is now happening. And that was also the point where I realized that I might as well have written this whole parts of the visuals creation in a completely separate program in a very different way, and similar stuff still would have come out. And then I realized that Oh, basically, it's my brain. It's
It's
my,
your
you know,
voice, yeah.
it's my voice that speaks through these different things. And so I put everything together within one program because it makes it very easy for me to combine all the different techniques in all kind of different ways and switch from one mode to the other. It just makes a beautiful hub of all these things. But I could lose it, and I would be very, 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 very sad. But I could still continue and do something completely different, and still know that my voice is still present within my own brain. So I'm actually very happy that I had that experience of having to go a totally different route, and knowing that I myself am actually what one calls an artist.
Right. Well, that's actually interesting because one of the things I was going to ask is when you have this software that you've developed that becomes your instrument, unlike someone for whom Ableton Live is their instrument, if you're writing your own thing, you end up with this conundrum at some point, which is like, I feel the need to change or I feel the need to add something, but doing that is going to break this thing. And
Hmm.
in breaking it, what am I going to lose? How am I going to screw up my life, right? How am I going to
Hmm.
reveal the imposter that I am by breaking my tool, right?
Hmm.
But it seems like you've become comfortable with the fact that your voice is going to end up coming out no matter what you do. That's pretty cool.
Yes, indeed.
You seem to have a lot better introspection about your artistic life than an awful lot of people that I meet. What do you
Hmm.
think is causing that? I mean, as part of the things you said you studied, that you said you studied a couple of years of psychology. I mean, how did
Hmm.
that affect you, or do you have like some sort of personal Zen-like practice that helps you understand yourself better? But you seem to be like really have a really healthy view of your own artistic self.
Hmm. Um, yeah, it's funny because in many ways I think that I don't have such a clear view of myself, but perhaps that is a sign of somebody being aware that there is so much to know about oneself. Did that make sense? What I just
Yeah,
said?
it did. It did.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
The more you know that you don't know, that kind of stuff. Yeah, that cliche is what I'm talking about.
right.
So I'm also very aware of having no clue who the hell I am, but I am very interested in doing some research in that. Indeed, um, I don't think that necessarily my studying psychology had such a huge influence. Well, I learned some pretty neat stuff. There was some really nice little ways of seeing how the brain works, also just biologically, and how that whole material aspects of the biological nature of the brain can be translated into the very subjective experience that one has within themselves. How all these different parts of the brain seem to be doing their own little thing and communicating in different ways, and how you can sometimes also can feel that within a chitter chatter within your own mind, and also that you can have a whole wide array of different perspectives and opinions. Of course, what comes out of your mouth generally needs to have somewhat of a consistent line in order for people to understand you, but actually you're this whole bunch of things that all are just mashed together, and the most powerful of those things manage to come out through your mouth, but the other things are also still there and might have completely different views, etc., etc. I find that whole thing super fascinating, and I have no idea why exactly. Like, I'm gonna guess some part of that is just going to be like genetics or something. Maybe
Right.
also part of that is just my time in Saudi Arabia, being quite solitary and just reflecting on things, and with not much more than myself. Well, now doing my family justice because my family
Right.
was also around. But still, with yourself being such a huge part of your life, perhaps
Right.
that also became a reason of being just a little bit more reflective about these things.
Sure. The value of isolation sometimes. Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think it's more that whole general attitude that I already had. That attitude that also drove me towards studying psychology is the thing that's also present within my thinking about my artistic presence. More than that, the study of psychology kickstarted that. It was more just a symptom of a thing of an interest that I already had developed way before.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So I can't believe it, but we've burned through the time that we set up. But before you go, I want to ask the one obvious question. I mean, you've given us your backstory as well as kind of your present story. I'm curious
Mhm.
about what you imagine your future story to look like. What are the things that every artist and every technologist, I mean, on both sides, in both of these holes, one of the things that we're always doing is not only working on the thing that is now, but also thinking about and exploring what's going to be the future. What are the things that you see around the corner for yourself?
Hmm. It's funny that I am not so much working on on grand future visions. I think I actually never have, which is funny because I am because the program that I made when I was 28, when I finished my studies
Hmm.
of music and technology, that program, that became the thing that I'm now still working on. So one could imagine that being this blueprint with a grand ideas for a future. This is what I'm going to develop it into. But that never was the intent. That just kept on happening. It just kept on adding things and restructuring things in a way that it would be very fit for whatever kind of inspiration might come in the future. And I guess I'm still doing that in a way. I am not very strongly working towards future applications, but I do try and keep my programming flexible, open, and modular enough so that any type of future path that I might choose can easily be, addressed. Having said that, there are of course still some fantasies of what the future might bring. Obviously, VR is a thing. Like, there's no way for that not to be a thing that I would want to do.
Of course, right.
Even though there is one problem with the VR, which is that it traps you in so strongly. With VR, you can get a perception of this virtual world being all around you, and you're completely free to move in 360 degrees anywhere around you within that virtual world. At the same time, your physical body gets all these things strapped to itself, which just from a pure physical sensation is a thing that does the opposite of creating that openness. And that's something that I find a little bit problematic there. I'm not saying that that's a reason for me to not want to engage, because it's still an awesome technology and I still want to use it. But yeah, that's just where there's some friction within my own attitudes
Right.
towards VR. And I guess other things. For me, just now, I'm very excited in producing audiovisual solo works, also together with a singer, Lea Fabricant, who will be creating in conjunction with my solo audiovisual works. She'll also be part of these solo gigs, so therefore they're not really solo. Um, she'll be a part of those by making audiovisual loops. She will be singing and making sounds and images, and her voice will be recorded with a microphone, while the image of her is going to be recorded with a camera. And these audiovisual loops will be placed in the virtual three-dimensional space. These loops can also be manipulated in an audiovisual way, so her face can become stretched while her voice becomes weirdly pitched into the other octaves, etc. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this live looping interaction thing can be made to create a truly audiovisual experience where sound and visuals are more tightly connected than I've ever done before. While at the same time, within this performance, I'll have the option of making everything extremely psychedelic, explosive, weird, because of all the experience that I've had in doing that with creating visuals for other people.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know if what I just now did was rambling or not, but that's just this whole audio visual thing where it's very tightly connected and at the same time very otherworldly. I'm very excited to explore that more strongly.
Well, and a lot of times when you start getting into this world where the audio visual mix becomes so intertwined, it becomes really difficult to find words for it, right? It's really difficult to
Yeah,
put a definition on it when because that interaction seems to defy vocalization in a way. So,
yeah, indeed. I guess that's it would perhaps less defy vocalization once it's become more of a known art form, because then the words appropriate for it would have been found. But it's especially defies vocalization because it doesn't really exist so much. So you're trying to use words based on older concepts to describe something new, which is, I guess, can lead to some nice poetry, but it's difficult. Yeah.
Right. Well, Tarik, that sounds really exciting, really fabulous. I'm anxious to get a chance to see some of that work in action.
Yeah.
Again, we can take a look at some of your work on your website, which is tarikbarri.nl, right?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Other than that, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have the chat. It was really fun.
Yeah, it was really fun indeed. All of these words came out of me, and you pulled them out in a really nice way. So thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day. All right.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
Hey, just a little note from Anaheim, California, where I'm wrapping up my time at the NAMM show. I just want to again reiterate my thanks to Tarik Barri. That was a fabulous chat and a really great insight into an amazing artist's mind. I want to thank you, the listeners, for continuing to support me, showing up every week and listening to this stuff. Here at the NAMM show, I met a number of you. I really want to thank you for the props and just telling me to keep on doing it, because that's what I want to do anyway. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your week. I'll see you next time around. Bye.